do it by hand, though, there is this additional layer. So let's try to take things up a notch here. This was version 2. With version 3, let's go ahead and just show a different way of achieving the same task, so as to introduce one other concept. So this is version 3, and the only difference here for the moment is this. Literally, I am now calling a validate function, but passing in an argument that's a special keyword. Some of you with Java backgrounds might remember this. This is a pointer of sorts. It's technically a reference. And in this context, because I'm using the keyword this inside of double quotes, which map into a form element, this is like a pointer to that form element. What does that mean? Well, even though it's at this moment in time just text and it's just HTML, when a structure like this is built up in memory and that line of code executes, this will be literally pointing to whatever the form element is, one of these rectangles. So via the this keyword, you can pass in a pointer or reference to a specific node in the tree. And you can do so via your HTML. So now if I scroll up here, my code has changed ever so slightly. And this way isn't necessarily better, but it just demonstrates how we can now pass nodes from our tree into code that we write. So now notice this time I have function validate, but now it takes a parameter, f. I am not specifying a data type. You don't need to do that. Just a name. And I called it f for form. And now notice I can have slightly shorter notation. If f.email.value equals nothing, yell at the user. Else if, else if. So the takeaway here is that this is now allowing me, one, to shorten my syntax, but that's not all that compelling in this case. But it is allowing me somehow to pass these nodes around as though they're indeed objects in a tree. And that'll become more important as the code gets more sophisticated. Well, now we can do one other thing. Let me go ahead and open up with my browser version 4 of the form. And notice that it has this feature that you might have seen on various websites. But now we can see how to do this. So notice that no matter how hard I try, I'm clicking on my mouse here, I cannot submit this form. Because it turns out that HTML has an attribute for buttons called disabled. And you can disable the clicking of a button, as simple as that. So now it doesn't matter if the user doesn't type in anything or types in something completely bogus. If I try submitting, nothing's actually going to happen. But again here, right, we all know that we have tools like Firebug. If I right click on this and I choose open up Firebug, open up the HTML, long story short, I can open up all of my HTML here. And then I can actually remove the disabled property. If I scroll down, let's zoom in and scroll down here. So let me just go ahead and remove this. All right, so we did this before when we implemented fake Google. Voila, there goes your error checking. Now, no reasonable human is going to do this. And they're only wasting their own time if they're going to do this. But it does, again, send the message that you still have to be having these checks server side. So what did we do in the code to actually do this? Well, actually, let me go back and show the proper behavior. Let me reload this page before I tweaked it underneath the hood. Go ahead, reload. All right, let's try this again. Form 4. So there it is, disabled by default. But notice when I check this box and, oh, wait, that's why. JavaScript is still disabled. Most of these demos won't work then. All right, let's go back here. Form 4. All right, click this. There we go. So notice we now have programmatic control over the DOM of our page so that I'm probably listening for that event called onClick. When I hear it, I'm grabbing a pointer or a reference to that other node in the tree, the submit button, and toggling programmatically that disabled state. So let's go ahead and see this here. Let me scroll down to this form. Notice I again have the validate function here, but I have another one. I have another event handler here called onClick, where onClick equals quote unquote toggle. And this is otherwise just associated with this text box. Let me scroll back up to the top here and see what's going on. Well, up here, not only do I have a validate function, I also have another second function also inside of my script tag. And it's actually pretty simple. A little verbose, but intuitive nonetheless. Function toggle, when it executes this branch. So if document.forms.registration.button. So what is button? Let me quickly scroll down to the bottom again. And now notice I've been giving these things names as I want to refer to them. So let me scroll down, down, down. There it is. I literally gave this input element for the button a name of button. But I could have called it anything. So now if I scroll back up to toggle, I now have if the button's disabled Boolean property is true, because that's all in one big set of parentheses. Then go ahead and set the same thing, document.forms.registration.button.disabled to false, else set it to true. And simply by tweaking these properties inside of these objects on the page, I'm able to change the aesthetics of the page and also the functionality. So again, we have now programmatic control of the DOM based on these event handlers that I'm now listening for. Well, let's look at now version 5. Version 5 is kind of sexy because I'm finally not just checking if the user has typed in something for their email address. I'm now using a feature called regular expressions. And some of you might have stumbled across these already for PSET 7, though it wasn't expected. But for your final project, you might indeed want to be able to not only look at a user's input, but also check, does this match a pattern that I want to see? Right? Back in the day, even Facebook would restrict access to people only with a harvard.edu email address. So this suggests that you want to be able to look at a user's input and not just check if it's quote unquote or something else, but you actually want to analyze its pattern. Well, you can actually do this relatively easily in JavaScript and PHP. And in JavaScript, the syntax is this. So notice this expression now. If it is not the case that document.forms.registration.emails.value, so here's another new lesson. Whereas in C, once you have a variable like a string, that is a data type. You can only look at its chars and the like, but there's no functionality built in. Notice here that email is the name I gave to my input called email. But I apparently am going one step further, and I'm actually calling a function. .match means go inside of this DOM node, inside of that rectangle, and call the function called match. So this is an example of this thing called object-oriented programming. Again, Java has this, C does not. PHP does, but it's not always used by folks. So this just means match the value of whatever the user typed in against this expression. And frankly, this looks more cryptic than it really needs to. But the slash there and the slash there just means here comes a regex, a regular expression. And what is that expression? A regular expression is just pattern. The pattern here is dot, and dot generally denotes anything, some character. Plus denotes, anyone know? At least one. So plus means one or more. So this expression, dot plus, means some character, whatever character, one or more times. And it doesn't have to be the same character. It just has to be a character, a one or more times. @ sign means the @ sign. Then we have dot plus, which is the same thing again. It doesn't have to be identical to the characters, but it means one or more characters here. / dot means probably what? Literally a dot, right? We have a little problem now. If dot means something special, but we want a dot, we need to escape it, as we did in C with new lines and things like that. Edu means edu, and then $ is a special token that just means match all the way to the end. Frankly, I've never come up with a good intuitive explanation of this, but $ means that .edu has to be at the end of the string that you're matching. And the opposite of that, for those who are curious, is a caret symbol, of all things. They're not really opposites. But for now, all I'm asking the question, just like Facebook version 1.0, was did the user register with some address ending in @something.edu? So not even Harvard in this case. Now, of course, this is not perfect, because this would allow the user to do crazy things like my name is Malin @Mather @Harvard right? You could do some crazy things so long as it ultimately ends in .edu. But there are more rigorous regular expressions you can use. And frankly, the strings, the patterns get so long and complex, generally you would then start using a library. Someone else's code who has figured out all of the nuances of possible email addresses in order to validate them. But you might find, especially if you're using your college address, has anyone ever gone to a website, tried to register with like username @college.harvard.edu, only to be told that this is an invalid email address? Anyone? This happens to me once in a while. So why is this? It's because some programmer decided that every email address on the internet is of the form something @something.something. They didn't even think about subdomains, which are quite common here at Harvard, Post, at college, at FAS, and the like. So there's nothing more infuriating than well, if you're really uptight like me, than trying to register with a legit email address, and the programmer just hasn't anticipated it. But why? What explains that issue? Most likely, it's a client-side JavaScript check or a server-side JavaScript check that is using a bad regular expression. But at least now we can check if they actually gave us something that looks like a .edu email address. But we can even do better. So in version 6 of this now,